I am Rachel Morgan, and I am 32 years old. I learned my worth on the night my parents told me I should never have been born. That night was not a random quarrel or a heated moment taken out of context. It was the breaking point of years of feeling like an extra piece in my own family, the forgotten child in a house that loved the idea of appearances more than the reality of care. The memory is burned into me like a scar, and even as I tell you this, I can feel the sting of that slap on my cheek as if it just happened. It began in the living room of the house I grew up in. The Morgans were known in Denver for their respectability. My father, Richard Morgan, ran a garage that was praised by neighbors for honesty and quality work. My mother, Helen Morgan, presented herself as a model of charity and class, always organizing events through the church and dressing with a touch of elegance that never failed to earn compliments. To the outside world, we were the family that had it all together. Inside that polished living room, however, cracks had spread across the walls long before this night. We had gathered under the pretense of discussing final preparations for my sister Olivia's wedding. Olivia, the star of the family, had secured herself a partner, a venue, and endless praise from Richard and Helen. I had spent weeks helping to coordinate smaller tasks, calling caterers, checking on invitations, and arranging flowers. I told myself it was a way to feel included. What I did not realize was that my parents were preparing to demand something more, something they believed was their right to take. Richard cleared his throat and looked at me with the authority he always carried, whether he was speaking to customers at his garage or scolding me as a child. He said that Olivia deserved a dream wedding, one that reflected her worth, and that I would provide $25,000 toward it. He said it as though he was asking me to pass the salt across the dinner table, casual yet absolute. My heart dropped. That number was not a minor request. It was the money I had saved for my first home, the hope of stepping out of an apartment and into a space that was finally mine. I swallowed hard and answered with a calmness that surprised even me. I told them I could not do it. I explained that the savings were for my apartment and that while I wanted Olivia to have a beautiful day, I was not in a position to hand over such a sum. Silence followed for a moment. Then the storm came. Helen's face tightened. The careful smile she wore at church events vanished, replaced by a fury I had only seen in glimpses when I was younger. She stood up so quickly that the coffee mug on the table rattled. Her voice cracked with rage as she shouted that I was selfish, ungrateful, and once again letting the family down. Before I could process the words, her hand swung across my face with a force that snapped my head to the side. It was not just a slap. It was the echo of every time she had scolded me as a child, every moment she had reminded me that I was not Olivia. Her words followed immediately, sharp enough to cut through bone. She screamed, "Wish you were never born!" The living room fell into a stillness after that, the kind of silence that drowns out even the hum of the refrigerator. My skin burned from her hand, but my heart burned more from the realization that those words were not said in anger alone. They were the truth she had carried for years and had chosen this moment to release. I looked at my father, hoping he would stop her or at least soften the blow with a word of reason. Instead, Richard stepped forward. He did not raise his hand like Helen, but he shoved my shoulder with enough force that I stumbled back into the edge of the table. The lamp rattled and I caught myself just before falling. His eyes were cold as stone as he muttered that I was an embarrassment, that Olivia was the daughter worth celebrating, and that I was only standing in the way of the family's happiness. Across the room, Olivia sat on the couch, her phone glowing in her hands. She did not look at me. She did not defend me. She acted as if the scene unfolding before her was a minor inconvenience, something to ignore until it was over. My sister, the one I had supported countless times, could not lift her eyes from her screen long enough to acknowledge me. There was another witness that night. Susan White, a photographer hired for the wedding, was arranging flowers near the entryway. She froze when Helen's hand connected with my face. She looked from me to my parents and back again, her expression torn between discomfort and pity. She did not intervene, perhaps afraid of losing her job or becoming a target herself, but the weight of her gaze pressed into me. Someone else had seen the truth, and that mattered in ways I did not yet understand. My cheek stung. My shoulder ached from my father's shove. But more than the physical pain was the crushing clarity of their words. My existence was not just a disappointment to them, it was in their eyes a mistake. I held my breath, my chest tight with fury and disbelief, and realized that nothing I had ever done for them had mattered. That night, as I left their house with tears hot on my face and my body trembling, I thought about every year I had tried to earn their love. And in that moment, the truth settled on me with finality. They never wanted me. Have you ever been treated as if your existence was a mistake? Share your city in the comments. The Morgans looked perfect from the outside. In Denver, our name carried a reputation that I never understood because I lived inside the truth of it. To neighbors and acquaintances, my father Richard was the picture of hard work. He owned a garage that locals praised for honest prices and reliable repairs. Customers shook his hand with admiration and told him they wished more men carried themselves with his dignity. My mother Helen was the image of social grace. She belonged to church committees, hosted luncheons, organized charity auctions, and always had her hair done in soft curls with makeup carefully applied. People admired her sharp wit and envied her wardrobe. Together, they were the couple that others whispered about as a model of community respectability. But behind the closed doors of our tidy two-story house, the story was very different. Respectability meant keeping appearances. Love was given out like a rare reward, mostly reserved for my older sister Olivia. She was 3 years older than me, and from the moment she was born, my parents had decided she was their star. She walked earlier than expected, she spoke in full sentences quickly, and by the time she was in kindergarten, she was already praised as gifted. I remember sitting at the dinner table listening to Helen recount Olivia's successes as though they were triumphs of the entire family. Richard would beam with pride, adding that Olivia had the determination of a future leader. When I offered news of my own, it was often brushed aside. At age 8, I won a local art contest with a watercolor painting of our backyard. The judge told me my use of light was impressive for a child. I ran home holding the ribbon, bursting with excitement. Helen glanced at it and said that it was cute, but Olivia had just earned top scores in math, and that was what mattered for a real future. That comparison became the rhythm of my childhood. No matter what I did, Olivia did something more important. When we played outside and fought over the swing, Helen always told me to stop being selfish and let Olivia have her turn. Richard rarely intervened, except to pat my shoulder later and tell me that family harmony mattered more than small wins. It was their way of saying I should swallow my feelings for the sake of Olivia's happiness. Those patterns hardened as we grew older. By middle school, I had stopped competing. I faded into the background because being visible meant being criticized. Helen scrutinized everything about me. She commented on the way my hair looked in the morning, told me to change shirts if she thought they looked sloppy, and even inspected my homework for mistakes, as if waiting to catch me fail. Richard joined in with his own brand of pressure. He talked constantly about careers and stability, insisting I should consider accounting like Olivia. When I mentioned marketing or public relations areas where I felt creative energy, he scoffed and said that Olivia was already interning with a law firm, and that was what real ambition looked like. The message was clear. If I followed Olivia's path, I might be acceptable. If I followed my own, I would always fall short. High school cemented it. Olivia excelled at sports and debate. She collected trophies and awards that Helen displayed prominently in the living room cabinet. I remember seeing my one ribbon from the art contest tucked in a drawer, while Olivia's medals gleamed in glass. When Olivia was accepted into a prestigious law program, the house filled with guests celebrating. My parents posted pictures online with captions bragging about their future lawyer. When it was my turn to graduate, I quietly enrolled in community college. I worked part-time at my father's garage and then later found internships in small PR firms. There were no parties for me. Helen once remarked at dinner that I was lucky to have a job at all. I dated occasionally, but relationships never lasted because every boyfriend quickly learned that my time belonged to my parents. Helen demanded rides to medical appointments, and Richard expected me to cover reception at the garage when he was short-staffed. One man I cared about ended things after Helen grilled him during dinner, asking about his ambitions and comparing him unfavorably to Olivia's boyfriend. By the time Olivia launched her career in the city, my role at home was cemented. I was the fallback, the helper, the invisible one who made sure Helen and Richard's lives ran smoothly, while Olivia only appeared twice a year to bask in their pride. The difference was brutal. Olivia walked in the door and was greeted with hugs, champagne, and endless questions about her firm, her vacations, and her clients. I walked in the same door carrying groceries or bills that needed paying and received barely a nod. My attempts to shine in my own way were dismissed with comments that my work was cute or temporary. Helen once told me directly that I should be grateful the family supported me at all because she was not sure my so-called career amounted to anything. Richard nodded along. Gaslighting became normal. They made me feel that my needs and accomplishments were selfish and unworthy. Whenever I pushed back, Helen accused me of being dramatic, and Richard told me to stop looking for attention. The years built a wall inside me, a wall of silence and unspoken pain. Outwardly, the Morgans were flawless. Inwardly, I was shrinking into someone I barely recognized. That was the environment leading to Olivia's wedding, the stage set long before the slap that finally shattered the illusion. I carried the weight of invisible sacrifice for years because it was easier to bend than to fight. When Helen's arthritis flared up, I was the one driving her to endless doctor appointments, rearranging my work schedule so she would not have to call a taxi. When Richard injured his backlifting equipment at the garage, I spent weeks bringing meals, handling his paperwork, and covering calls from customers so the business would not lose its reputation. None of these efforts were acknowledged as extraordinary. They were treated as obligations, as if I owed them for the privilege of existing. Every month, I transferred a portion of my paycheck into their account to cover bills they claimed were emergencies. Sometimes it was a roof repair, other times prescriptions, occasionally groceries, though I suspected much of it went into entertaining Olivia whenever she came home. My salary as a PR specialist was comfortable but not lavish. I lived in a modest apartment, cooked my own meals, and avoided vacations because saving felt urgent. Still, I gave without hesitation, convincing myself that loyalty would one day earn me a place at their table of pride. Olivia rarely lifted a finger. She breezed into town with expensive handbags and stories of court victories, leaving behind little more than perfume and laughter. Helen and Richard treated her like royalty. They called her the Morgan legacy and introduced her to neighbors as their greatest achievement. Meanwhile, they introduced me as the younger one who helped out here and there, as though my life had no structure beyond serving them. I tried to hold on to hope. When Olivia announced her engagement, the family erupted in celebration. Helen cried tears of joy. Richard opened champagne, and Olivia's fiancé David was paraded around like a prize. I hugged Olivia, genuinely happy for her, but somewhere deep inside, I wondered if this would be my chance. Perhaps by throwing myself into the preparations, I could finally show that I mattered. I volunteered immediately to handle the overwhelming details. Olivia, busy with her firm, shrugged and said, "Sure." That single word became my assignment. I threw myself into the work. I called venues until late at night, comparing prices and availability. I negotiated with caterers to secure a menu that matched Olivia's tastes, while also considering Helen's dietary restrictions. I emailed florists, collected contracts, created spreadsheets of guest lists, and even designed custom invitations using what little design skills I had left from college art classes. Each task consumed my evenings and weekends. My friends stopped inviting me out because I was always exhausted or glued to my laptop. I told myself it was worth it because this time they would notice. I even spent money I could not afford. $2,000 from my savings went to purchase a vintage sapphire necklace I thought would make the perfect gift for Olivia on her wedding day. I pictured her smiling at me in front of everyone, maybe even thanking me publicly. I bought a simple navy dress for myself because Helen always criticized my clothing. I practiced smiling in the mirror so I would not look resentful when the day came. Each late night, I imagined the reward. I imagined Richard shaking my hand with pride, or Helen hugging me for once without conditions. I ignored the gnawing voice in my head whispering that it was futile. Their patterns were too strong. Yet hope is a stubborn thing. I clung to it like a lifeline. Every time I delivered progress updates, Helen found a way to belittle them. She rewrote my emails to florists, called my timelines sloppy, and said Olivia would have done it all more elegantly. Richard flipped through my organized binder and muttered that it was fine, but not up to Olivia's standards. Olivia herself contributed little. She sent short texts that said, "Looks fine," or "Do whatever you think." When she did visit, she sat at the table with Helen and Richard, laughing about her latest case while I cleared the dishes. My voice did not reach them. Once I suggested a seating chart adjustment, and Helen cut me off sharply, telling me to focus on getting it done, not on giving opinions. Richard nodded in agreement, while Olivia did not even glance at me. Still, I kept working. I told myself that on the wedding day, everything would come together, and they would finally see me as more than background. I pictured them toasting not just Olivia, but me for the effort I had given. I told myself that this was my chance to step into the light, even if just for one evening. That dream kept me going, even as exhaustion carved dark circles under my eyes. I wanted to believe that years of invisibility could be erased with one perfect day. The week before the wedding, the tension in the Morgan household grew so thick that it felt like the walls themselves were closing in. I was running on fumes, double-checking contracts and receipts, making sure vendors were confirmed, and praying that nothing slipped through the cracks. Yet even with all my effort, I sensed that Helen and Richard were circling, waiting for the moment to declare me a failure. The family meeting that broke me was supposed to be about finalizing the timeline. We sat in the living room, the binder I had spent months building spread across the coffee table. Richard cleared his throat and began in that same authoritative voice he had used my whole life. He said Olivia's wedding needed to be a dream, a day that reflected the Morgan name, and that I would contribute $25,000 toward ensuring perfection. He said it like a foregone conclusion, not a request. My stomach twisted, but I forced my voice to remain steady. I explained that the money he referred to was my savings for an apartment, the first real investment in my own independence. I said I could not hand it over. For a second, silence hung in the air. Then Helen's face darkened like a storm gathering. Her lips curled as she snapped that I was selfish, ungrateful, and once again ruining things for Olivia. She rose from her seat so quickly that the binder slid slightly off the table. My heart raced, but I kept my ground. I repeated that I could not give them the money. That was when Helen's hand came across my face. The sound echoed in the room, sharp and humiliating. My head jerked to the side, my cheek burning. It was not just a slap. It was a memory dragged from childhood, when she had struck me for breaking a glass, when she had smacked my hand for coloring outside the lines, when she had punished me physically to remind me that I was smaller and lesser. Now she had done it again, as though forgetting that I was no longer 12 but a 32-year-old woman. Her voice cracked with venom as she shouted, "Wish you were never born!" The words pierced deeper than the sting on my cheek. I felt the air leave my lungs. Richard did not stop her. Instead, he stood and stepped toward me. He did not hit me, but he shoved my shoulder with enough force to knock me backward into the edge of the coffee table. The lamp rattled, pain shot up my arm, and I stumbled to catch myself. His voice was cold, almost detached, as he muttered that I was an embarrassment and that Olivia was the daughter worth celebrating. I looked at Olivia, my last hope for someone to stand beside me. She was seated on the couch, her phone glowing in her hand. She kept her eyes on the screen, pretending not to see. She had always been silent in these moments, but I had hoped that adulthood might have changed her. It had not. My sister, whom I had supported endlessly, could not look up long enough to acknowledge my humiliation. There was someone else in the room, Susan White. The photographer hired for the wedding had been placing flowers near the entryway. She froze when Helen's palm struck my face. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly as if she might say something, but then she closed it and looked away. Still, I felt her gaze heavy with pity and shame. She had seen everything. She had heard the words. That mattered even if she remained silent. The pain in my cheek throbbed, but it was the ache inside my chest that nearly crushed me. All those years of giving, of sacrificing, of begging for approval, and here was the truth laid bare. To my parents, I was not a daughter worth loving. I was a mistake, a burden, a shadow cast by Olivia's light. I tasted blood on my lip from where my teeth had cut into the skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw every insult they had ever hurled back at them, but the words lodged in my throat. My hands trembled as I closed the binder, pressing it shut as if to lock away the illusion I had built. I looked at Helen still seething, at Richard standing over me with disdain, at Olivia silent and indifferent, and at Susan quietly shifting in discomfort. Something broke inside me then. Not a scream, but a clarity so sharp it nearly split me in two. They had said what they truly felt. They had wished me erased. And I thought maybe it was time to give them exactly what they wanted. Without another word, I turned and walked out of that living room, each step heavy, yet strangely freeing the door, slamming behind me with a finality that echoed through my bones. I drove away from that house with my cheeks still stinging and my body trembling so hard that I had to grip the steering wheel tighter than ever before. The night air in Denver was cool, but inside the car it felt suffocating. Streetlights blurred past as tears filled my eyes. I replayed the moment over and over, my mother's words cutting through me like broken glass. "Wish you were never born." That phrase circled in my head, colliding with the push from my father's hand, the emptiness in my sister's silence, and the pity on Susan's face. I had endured a lifetime of subtle cruelty of comparisons and gaslighting, but this was different. This was final. My parents had spoken the truth they had always hidden behind criticism. They did not just think I was a disappointment. They thought my existence was a mistake. As I drove, I thought back to childhood memories that I had buried but never erased. I remembered the day I accidentally dropped a glass of milk in the kitchen. Helen's face turned red and she slapped my hand so hard it left a mark. She told me I needed to learn discipline and that Olivia would never be so careless. I remembered Richard locking me in the garage once after I talked back when I was 13. He left me there for hours in the dark until I sobbed and promised I would not argue again. Those punishments had shaped me into someone who swallowed her voice, someone who believed silence was safer than defiance. And now, decades later, they had proven that they still saw me as the child to be corrected, the one who deserved a slap and a shove when I stepped out of line. By the time I reached my apartment, I could hardly breathe. I collapsed onto the couch and buried my face in my hands. My body shook with sobs I had not let out in years. My phone buzzed with notifications, but I ignored them. I needed the silence to feel what had just happened. Hours passed before I pulled out my journal. It was a habit I had kept since college, a way to let words carry what my voice could not. My hand trembled as I wrote. If they wish I was never born, then maybe I should vanish from their lives for real. The thought came not as despair, but as clarity. I was done fighting for a place at their table. I could not keep bleeding myself dry to win scraps of approval. They had made their choice, and now I would make mine. I wrote until the page was filled with promises to myself. I would protect what little I had left. I would not give them another piece of me. For once in my life, I would stand up not with arguments, but with action. I closed the journal, my decision sealed. The next morning, I called Mark Harris, a lawyer I had met through my company. He was sharp, practical, and had always treated me with respect. When he picked up, I told him I needed advice about protecting my finances from family interference. He listened quietly as I explained the history of shared accounts, the constant demands, and the explosion the night before. His voice was calm but firm. "Rachel, if you want to be free, you have to set boundaries that cannot be broken." I nodded even though he could not see me. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was on my side. After the call, I sat on my balcony staring at the city I had once thought of as home. The skyline was beautiful against the rising sun, but I felt no belonging there anymore. My parents had made it clear that I was nothing to them, and I realized that Denver itself had become a cage. The walls were built from their expectations, their judgments, and my own fear of leaving. That morning, I knew with certainty that I could not stay. I needed to vanish, not in despair, but in survival. My parents had wished me gone. So I would give them exactly that, but on my own terms. The decision to leave Denver became more real with every hour that passed after that call with Mark. I listed my apartment for sale, even though I knew I would not get the full market value if I rushed. I no longer cared. Freedom was worth more than profit. Within days, an investor offered less than I hoped, but I accepted without hesitation. I packed my belongings, slowly sorting everything into piles. Sell, donate, keep. The keep pile grew smaller with each box. Clothes that carried memories of family dinners went into donation bags. Furniture I had bought to impress my parents when they visited was sold online. What remained were things tied to me alone. My laptop, a stack of journals, a few framed sketches from college, and the sapphire necklace I had bought for Olivia but could no longer bring myself to give her. That necklace became a symbol of my foolish hope and of the money I had thrown away for nothing. I tucked it into the bottom of my suitcase anyway, not because it reminded me of her, but because it reminded me of my strength to keep going, even when love was not returned. I searched for a destination far enough away that my parents could not reach me with sudden visits or guilt trips. Santa Fe called to me in a way I cannot explain. I had visited once for a work trip and remembered the adobe houses, the warm desert light, and the sense that life moved at a different rhythm there. It felt like a place where someone could disappear and begin again. I signed a lease on a small adobe home on the edge of town. The floor creaked, the faucet leaked, but when I turned the key in the door, I felt a surge of relief. This was mine. No one could demand entry. No one could call me selfish for closing the door. I chose to work under the name R. Lane, a version of myself not tied to the Morgan family. I updated my portfolio online and began taking freelance contracts in marketing and public relations. Small businesses needed help with social media logos and press releases. The work trickled in and the checks were modest, but each email of thanks from a client felt like validation I had craved for years. For the first time, my skills were acknowledged without comparison to Olivia. One morning after settling in, I wandered into a local cafe called Desert Bloom. Behind the counter was Maria Torres, a woman in her 40s with curly hair, warm eyes, and the kind of smile that felt like sunlight after a storm. She noticed immediately that I was new. We started with small talk about coffee, but within days, she learned my name and asked gently if I had moved here for a fresh start. I hesitated before answering, but her kindness felt safe. I told her only part of the truth, that I was building a new life. She nodded knowingly and said Santa Fe was good for that. Her acceptance made me feel less like a runaway and more like a traveler who had finally reached the right stop. Days turned into weeks, and I began to build small routines. I woke early and ran along desert trails, the red earth crunching beneath my sneakers, the vast horizon reminding me that the world was larger than the cage I had left behind. I returned to painting in the evenings, letting colors bleed onto the canvas without fear of judgment. For the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing freely. The ghosts of Denver still whispered at night, but Santa Fe wrapped me in quiet strength, telling me that I was not lost. I was simply beginning again. Peace never lasts long when you come from a family that feeds on control. I had been in Santa Fe for only a month when the first storm reached me. It came not through a phone call or a letter, but through social media. One evening, I checked my old account out of habit, and there it was. Helen had written a post on Facebook for all of Denver to see. Rachel abandoned us and stole family savings. The words jumped off the screen, each one crafted to paint me as a criminal. Beneath it, Richard had added his own comment. Ungrateful child. We gave her everything. Friends of the family chimed in with sympathy, sending prayers for Helen, and Richard promising to support them through their heartbreak. My stomach churned as I read each line. They had not only wished me gone, now they were rewriting the story so that my absence made them martyrs. I sat frozen, the glow of the phone lighting up the dark room of my little adobe home. For years, I had imagined leaving would free me, but I had underestimated their hunger to control the narrative. By painting me as the villain, they could keep their image intact. The perfect family betrayed by the selfish daughter. I slammed the phone down and paced the floor, my breath short. A part of me wanted to reply to defend myself, to post screenshots of every transfer I had made into their accounts, every receipt that proved I had been the one supporting them. But another part of me remembered the exhaustion of defending myself my entire life. They would twist anything I said. Still, I could not sit back entirely. I called Mark Harris and told him what had happened. He listened patiently and asked me to forward the screenshots of the posts. By the next day, he had drafted a legal statement clarifying that all family accounts had been funded primarily by me, and that I had created a trust to ensure the money was used properly. He advised me to stay silent publicly and let the facts speak if needed. I wanted to believe that would be enough, but inside I felt raw, exposed, and once again defined by their lies. The next morning, I walked into Desert Bloom Cafe looking as though I had not slept. Maria noticed immediately. She slid a cup of coffee toward me and raised an eyebrow. "Family trouble," she asked gently. I gave a half smile and said something like that. She nodded without prying, but her eyes told me she understood. Later that week, she shared her own story of leaving a controlling marriage years earlier. "They always get louder when they realize they have lost control," she said. That line stayed with me. It reframed their Facebook assault. They were shouting because they could no longer reach me directly. I held on to that thought, but the noise still hurt. Olivia remained silent through it all. She did not defend me, but she did not accuse me either. Her silence was as sharp as Helen's words. To friends and neighbors, her lack of comment looked like agreement. To me, it was the final proof that she would never stand beside me. Days passed and more lies appeared. Someone forwarded me a thread from a Denver community group where Helen had claimed I had stolen $10,000 meant for medical bills. Richard backed her up. People speculated and judged me without knowing the truth. I sat in my small living room reading strangers call me heartless and greedy. It made my chest tighten with the same panic I had felt as a child when Helen lectured me. Once again, the narrative was theirs. But this time, I was not completely powerless. Mark checked the trust accounts and confirmed that Helen had recently tried to withdraw large sums without documentation and had been denied. He told me this was proof of her dishonesty and that if things escalated legally, the evidence was in my favor. Knowing that gave me a fragile sense of safety. Maria reinforced it by reminding me that I was not the person they described. "You are building a life here," she said. "Do not let their noise pull you back into the old cage." I clung to those words. At night, the desert air cooled my skin as I stood on the porch, looking out at the horizon. The stars stretched across the sky, wider and brighter than anything I remembered in Denver. Each one whispered that the universe was bigger than their lies. Yet even under that sky, the pain lingered. Family betrayal is not erased by distance. It echoes inside you. Their posts reminded me that they were still reaching, still grasping, still desperate to keep me under their thumb, even from miles away. But Santa Fe gave me the strength to resist. And each morning when I woke up and opened my laptop to work under the name R. Lane, every email from a satisfied client was another brick in the wall I was building between their version of me and the woman I was becoming. The storm of their accusations had barely settled when the next wave came. Not in the form of Facebook posts, but through personal messages meant to hook me back into their orbit. One afternoon, I checked my email and saw Helen's name in the inbox. The subject line read, simply, "Hospital." My heart skipped in spite of myself. I opened it to find her words carefully crafted. "I am in the hospital. Come home. Family should be together in times like this." There was no detail about what was wrong. No explanation, just a command disguised as a plea. My hands trembled on the keyboard, but I did not reply. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Family comes first. Do not abandon us now." It was not a request. It was the same phrase he had used all my life whenever he wanted obedience. I stared at the screen, remembering how many times I had canceled plans or skipped opportunities because of those 3 words. My throat tightened. Later that evening, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was familiar. Olivia. She wrote that she was sorry that things had gone too far, that she wanted us to fix what was broken. She ended with a line that made me pause. "Please call. I miss my sister." For a moment, my chest ached with the temptation to believe her. I imagined what it would feel like to walk back into that house and finally hear them admit they had been wrong. But then, memory hit me like another slap. Olivia sitting on the couch staring at her phone while Helen struck me. Olivia saying nothing while Richard shoved me. Olivia staying silent while they smeared me online. Her letter was not proof of change. It was bait to pull me back into the cage. I folded the paper slowly and set it aside. That night, I sat at Desert Bloom with Maria. She watched me stirring my coffee long after it had gone cold. "They want me to come back," I admitted. Maria leaned forward, her eyes steady. "If you go back, nothing will change. They will treat you like a child again because that is the role they built for you. I swallowed hard, knowing she was right. The guilt still clawed at me, though. A voice in my head whispered that maybe I was cruel for staying away. Maybe I owed them something for raising me at all. But then I remembered Helen's hand on my face. Richard's shove their words declaring that my existence itself was a mistake. I thought of all the years of silence of being erased. The guilt began to shrink. I whispered to Maria that I did not think I could survive another round of their cruelty. She reached across the table and touched my hand gently. Then, do not go back. Her certainty anchored me. That night, I wrote in my journal again. I promised myself I would not answer Helen's email, Richard's text, or Olivia's letter. I promised that my life in Santa Fe was real, that the woman called Ak R. Lane was stronger than the girl who had cowered in Denver. For the first time, I chose myself over their demands. Just when I thought silence would protect me, the situation escalated in a way that reached far beyond family gossip. One morning, a former coworker from Denver forwarded me a link to an online article from a local news outlet. The headline made my stomach drop. Daughter ruins sister's wedding, abandons parents. My name was not printed in full, but it was obvious who they were talking about. The article quoted Helen claiming that I had taken money meant for family expenses and vanished, leaving them destitute in their time of need. Richard was quoted as saying they had trusted me with everything and I had betrayed that trust. The story painted me as a villain who had destroyed a family celebration for selfish gain. Reading those words was like being slapped all over again. I felt heat rise in my chest and my hands shook as I scrolled through the paragraphs. Dozens of comments followed strangers condemning me without knowing me. I wanted to scream. I called Mark immediately, my voice breaking as I told him about the article. He was calm, almost too calm, and told me to forward him the link. Within hours, he had contacted the newspaper demanding a retraction. He reminded them that there was documented proof of the trust account I had set up, proof that I had been the one depositing money for years, proof that Helen had tried and failed to withdraw funds without justification. He told me to stay off the comment section to let the facts speak. I agreed, but my heart still pounded with fury. Later that night, I sat in the quiet of my adobe home, wondering how many people back in Denver now believed I was heartless. The walls felt like they were closing in. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window and reminded myself that I had chosen this distance to survive. Their lies did not make them truth. Days later, the newspaper updated the story with a correction. They admitted that financial documents showed I had supported my parents for years, and that the trust prevented misuse of funds. It was not a full apology, but it was enough to shift the narrative. Some commenters retracted their anger. Others went silent, but I felt the smallest spark of vindication. Still, the wound remained. Olivia stayed silent yet again. No public defense, no private message, nothing. Her absence screamed louder than Helen's accusations. Then something unexpected happened. A message appeared on my phone from Susan White, the photographer who had been in the living room that night. She wrote that she had been haunted by her silence. She admitted she had seen everything, the slap, the shove, the words. She confessed that she had said nothing out of fear of losing her job, but she wanted me to know she was sorry. I stared at her message for a long time, tears filling my eyes. For so long, I had felt like the only witness to my pain. Knowing that someone else had seen it, had carried it with her, was a strange kind of relief. It did not erase the betrayal, but it confirmed the truth. I was not crazy. I had not imagined the violence. It had happened, and someone else had seen it. That night, I finally slept without waking in panic. The next morning, I stood on my porch watching the sunrise over the desert. The light spilled across the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and red. I breathed deeply and let the warmth fill me. For the first time since leaving Denver, I felt the power shifting. My parents had tried to erase me with lies, but the truth had broken through. Their perfect image had cracks now visible to everyone. And in those cracks, I saw my chance to step fully into my own life. Santa Fe gave me something Denver never could, the chance to exist without constant judgment. On quiet mornings, I sat on the porch of my adobe home, coffee in hand, watching the desert come alive with the rising sun. The air carried the scent of sage and dust, and each breath reminded me that I had survived. I was no longer the invisible daughter shadowed by Olivia's accomplishments or chained to Helen and Richard's endless demands. I was Rachel, or rather E or R Lane, a woman rebuilding piece by piece. My work as a freelancer began to flourish. Small businesses trusted me with their campaigns. Artists asked me to design logos, and each successful project built my confidence. Clients praised my creativity, something my family had dismissed as a silly hobby. For once, my skills mattered not because they were compared to someone else, but because they had value on their own. I began to save again, not for my parents' emergencies, but for my own future. With every deposit into my account, I felt stronger. Yet healing was not only about money or work. I wanted to reclaim my voice. I started a workshop at the local library teaching young women how to build personal brands and write their own stories. Some of them came from families like mine, families that told them they were never enough. Seeing their eyes light up when they realized their worth became the most meaningful part of my week. I no longer needed my parents' approval. I had built a new circle that saw me for who I was. Olivia eventually reached out with a message. It was simple. I miss you. For a moment, I stared at it, remembering the letter she had sent before the silence in the living room, the years she had stood by while I was diminished. The words might have meant something once, but now they felt hollow. I deleted the message without replying. It was not cruelty. It was closure. I understood that forgiveness did not require reunion. My parents never admitted what they had done, and perhaps they never would, but I no longer carried the weight of waiting for it. The desert sky at night became my companion. I would step outside, look up at the endless stretch of stars, and feel a peace I had never known. Sometimes guilt whispered that I had abandoned them, but then I remembered Helen's hand across my face and Richard's shove the words, "Wish you were never born," and the guilt faded. I had not abandoned them. They had abandoned me long ago. Now I chose myself. Sitting on that porch as the evening turned cool, I whispered a promise into the desert wind. They will never see me as enough, but I am enough, and that is what matters. If you have ever had to cut ties with someone to survive, if you have ever walked away because staying meant losing yourself, then you know the courage it takes. Sometimes the bravest act is not to fight for a place at their table, but to build your own. I disappeared not to punish them, but to save myself. And I would do it again. If you have ever had to cut ties for survival, share your story below. Like and subscribe so we can keep spreading the truth that freedom is worth more than approval.